Well, good morning again, good afternoon, and good evening to all viewers from all around the world. This is the Humanizing Growth series brought to you by the Institute for Real Growth. It's the purpose of the Institute for Real Growth to connect CMOs and other growth leaders to best practice case studies, to content matter experts, and to connect them with peers and any source that can help them drive real growth. My name is Frank van den Driest, and today I'm very honored to have with me Mark Reed, the CEO of WPP.
Great, thanks very much, Frank. Thanks for having me.
Great, well, my pleasure for sure. So today in this hour, we're going to talk about transformation for growth. And definitely in the current context, what does that mean? What does it mean for WPP? And also, what does it mean for the way you collaborate with your partners, for example? So with that, welcome, Mark. My first question to you, where are you and how are you?
So, well, I'm in London, at home on the ground floor. I think for me, like everyone, it's pretty intense at the moment, the volume of these calls. So I kind of look forward to Friday afternoon. I have to say, it's not easy working like this. I think you can run a company, you can manage your way through a crisis, but there is a certain sort of human contact that's missing. I mean, it's an odd time in terms of, you talked about humanizing growth, an odd time in terms of human contact. In one way, we're physically separate, and yet I think I've connected with more people over the time than I've ever connected with before, including old friends and family members and people I was studied with. But at the same time, we've sort of been locked away from each other. So I think none of us quite know what to make of it. And I'm certainly looking forward to coming out the other side.
Yeah, in our talk before we started, you mentioned that people, start to reflect being at home.
Yeah.
And different circumstances and so on. We're going to come back on that. But first, in the area of the first big topic before we go into transformation, the title is Transformation for Growth. Let's first talk about growth. You know that we did the Real Growth study, and we talked to over 500 industry and thought leaders. And the interesting thing, we had quite an extensive conversation guide for those interviews. But we spent, in many cases, almost half the interview time on the first question. What is growth? How do you define growth? So I want to ask that question to you.
Yeah, look, I think, growth is very much on everyone's minds, particularly at the moment when it's the one thing that we're probably most companies not doing. I think that we define WPP's purpose as to use the power of creativity to build a better future for our people, our clients, and our communities, and that's why we exist. That's our purpose. I don't know whether that directly addresses your growth question, but I think in a funny way, we are the growth partner to our clients. We're the partner. To my mind, we're the partner that helps them grow. And the key task of our growth challenge was to define our market broadly enough so that WPP could also grow. Not to get stuck in like the analog media bucket that's going down, but to define it more broadly in terms of, analog and digital, so broader in that sense, in terms of marketing and sales, and in terms of both, creativity and technology. So we redefined our offer from really being a communications business to talking about experience and commerce and technology to really, I guess, broaden the types of conversations we can have and give modern clients what they need. But I think it's sort of breadth, I think, and I understand why people discuss it, because, defining what business you're in, if you like, is the first stage, I guess, of any CMO's job, right?
Well, I'd like to elevate it a little bit. I don't know if elevate is the perfect word, but in those conversations, we talked about growth. A growth ambition could be top line growth, could be bottom line growth, could be customer satisfaction growth, could be top-line growth for your customers, could be growth in terms of you deliver more on your purpose and your force for good as WPP. Could be growth in making a better life and reality for your employees. So there's many dimensions of growth. And I think rather than having a technical definition, my question to somebody like in your position would be, there's no right or wrong because they're all growth.
Well, I quite like all of those.
About all the time.
I'd like all of those definitions, Frank, in a way, if I can have them. But I think, people growth is important. Are we the best place for people to work? Can they grow at WPP, and increasingly can they bring their whole self to work as well? I think is a question on people's minds. I think that for our clients, I think for everyone, I don't know whether this time will make us reflect on the importance of growth, because a lot of people, growth implies being on that rat race of, continuous improvement, innovation, and everything else. And I think a lot of people have got out of the rat race to some extent for the last 3 months. But no, I think growth is the livelihood of all companies, without which you can't give people opportunities, you can't give pay rises, you can't give bonuses, you can't promote people, you can't recruit people. So I think there's a certain satisfaction we all get from the sort of sense of progress in life. And so I think that's why growth is so important.
I just want to push a little bit more. One last question on this topic. So if we would make it simpler and we define growth as in financial growth, top line or bottom line, people growth, which is your own people and maybe your customers, or societal impact growth. How do you split your time between talking with clients and internally between those three?
So I think, for us, the most important metric, at least from an investor perspective, is top line growth. My view is, if you can grow your top line, all else will follow. Now, to get there, we have to do the things you talked about, which is help your clients grow their top line, help your people develop so you retain the best people. And I think increasingly play, the right role in society. And, I probably spend maybe a third of my time on each of those, a third of my time probably with our people, maybe a third of my time with our clients, and maybe a third of my time, with the variety of stakeholders and, both investors as well as community groups, as well as, other sort of community, ESG type responsibilities. And I think that, for most chief executives, that percentage is increasing. And I think what we need to make sure is we link it directly to, business growth as well as, improvement to client satisfaction, and really drive it into the business, rather than have like the ESG department. You've got the rest of the company and the ESG department. That's not the right answer, right?
No, totally get it. So transformation, that's obviously against a context of fundamental change that we're going through. Now, we're not entirely solely focused on chief marketing officers as the Institute, but all growth leaders. But at least, let's say, demand side. If you look at the demand side of basically our viewers currently at this moment in time, what do you see as the two most important fundamental changes that are taking place for people in marketing and demand side related jobs?
I mean, that's a big question. I'll make one observation on transformation. We defined, WPP as a creative transformation company. So creative in the sense that we think that ideas, innovation, inspiration is what's important. Transformation in terms of helping clients from how they used to market in the past to how they need to market in the future. Then to be a company so we could, by collaborating, come up with the best answer. I think in that you see the two pillars. I think that marketing, the great thing about it is it's a mix of art and science, isn't it? And I don't think it's 100% one or 100% the other. The sort of the yin and the yang, to my mind, are creativity and technology. If we had a mission for WPP, it would be creativity powered by technology. And I think that great marketers understand creativity. They understand what is a good idea and what is not a good idea, and how hard you have to push to come up with the best idea. But increasingly, they're required to understand technology and all the things that come out of that: data, analytics, segmentation. So I think those are the two things. I mean, if I can have a third, I'd say I think by the end of sort of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, marketing and advertising had kind of become synonymous. And I think that we forgot that there were 4 Ps in the 4 Ps, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think the last 20 years have been, recognition that there are 4 Ps, and it's place, what price, promotion, and product, right? I think the best companies innovate in their product. They think about the place or how to make it available. They're thinking about the promotions much beyond just advertising, and they think about the price. And so I think that CMOs have to grasp that nettle of all of those things. And if I talk to a CMO today and say, how much time do you spend on looking at the ads? They go, I don't know, 5% of my day. It might have been 50% of their day 20 years ago. So I think that that's a challenge, and I think that we sort of need to put the marketing back into marketing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because you mentioned the left brain, the right brain, the art and the science, and then you went, if I were to add a third, and that was exactly what my question was going to be. Aren't you forgetting a third? But I had another one in mind.
Yeah.
We just completed a very significant piece of work together with Spencer Stewart on the profile of the future-proof CMO.
Yeah.
We called him the Da Vinci Growth CMO. And as you know, or probably know, Da Vinci was both a fantastic artist, but he was also a breakthrough scientist. But he was also a humanist. And he had deep empathy for humankind and the planet we live in. And that empathy, I think, is so critical. We just completed a program in which one of your colleagues actually contributed, Ellen Davies. And we looked at transformation and why they fail. And they fail for 4 reasons, but mostly one. One is that it's a transformation, but we don't change the old ways of working.
Yeah.
We're only focused on redundancy or too much, or we relying on technology. But the 4th and most important one is that we forget it's about people. That transformations are about people. And that empathy that you need to bring to the table, I think is something next to the art and science that is so incredibly important. Do you recognize that? Is that something that you...
Well, I do and I don't. I mean, I'd like to think that empathy was the sort of most important human characteristic, but I think there's quite a lot of evidence that it's not. Sort of maniacal monomania or psychopathy or other human dimensions that can be quite effective in business, as we're well aware.
Yeah.
So, if you take Steve Jobs, did Steve Jobs have a lot of empathy with people? From what I've read, I don't think that he did. But he was a fantastic marketer, wasn't he? I mean, he understood marketing as well as anyone else. So I think that, there are founder-led businesses where so much comes from the founder, and that's right. There are managerial businesses maybe where the founder is no longer there, and that's a challenge because you have to put the spirit of the founder in some way, back into the company. And so maybe in those businesses you do need more empathy to understand what's going on with people. But I think that a lot of innovation, by definition, is telling people about things that they didn't know they needed. I didn't know I needed AirPods till I found out that they existed. So a lot of innovation is about things that people don't need. So I think empathy can only take you so far, sadly.
Well, yeah, I guess it's.
But taking people on a journey, Frank. Look, if you're trying to transform a business, and you have to take people on a journey, that's a different thing, right? I mean, Steve Jobs, I guess he transformed Apple, but it was sort of always his company, or with some time when he was not in it, obviously. Look, I think transformation is a different task, and maybe for transformation, you do need empathy because you have to take people with you on that journey and get them to buy in, and I don't think you can do that without having it. And I think that people today inside organizations do look for their leaders to have more empathy than perhaps they did I certainly think they do now than they did in the past. And, you can see situations where founders that don't have empathy for what's going on, run into issues, and then they have to backtrack. A number of companies during COVID have made the wrong decisions in a number of respects, often from founders, and they've had to apologize and row back and pull back and come to a different point of view. So I'm not dismissing it. I just think there's more than one way to get to the point.
Yeah, I think the way I see it basically is that there's, you can definitely have a transformation that's focused at eliminating redundancies or, give technology, leverage the power of technology. But I think any transformation that doesn't have the customer journey as its backbone is an opportunity missed. It doesn't say it won't be successful, it's an opportunity missed. But I want to just go back and we talked about the big changes. Let's talk a little bit about the current changes. I must say personally, I've been very impressed with your response, which felt very personal also, but also represented a very large company. What would you want to say about what's happened recently, COVID, but now also this very strong stance that people take against racism, and very specifically a people's companies like yours that also touches many of the Fortune 500 companies, about the role that you have to play and the responsibility, and how do you guide all those 100,000 plus employees?
Yeah, thank you. So look, I think there's a lot in that question. I think COVID and to some extent the response following the killing of George Floyd is an acceleration of it's a rapid acceleration of the existing trends that are taking place in society. The trend to shop online, to use cashless payments, to educate, education maybe is a total discontinuity, but most of the things is a rapid acceleration of the current trend. E-commerce in America went from 5, I think, to 15. It was expected to take 4 years. It took 4 weeks. We sort of lived through, I say, the greatest period of innovation in the last decade, and it's hard to think of something that you can do that's not being done online. Exercise classes, art auctions. The art houses basically shut down. Everything's online. Those things, they're not going back, I don't think. I don't think they're suddenly going to go back to organizing things the way they used to. So it is a sort of discontinuity, and we're going to face a challenge, on the high street. When the high streets reopen, probably, 1 in 5 shops may never reopen, or shut quite soon. When offices reopen, we're probably going to have, 20% of offices empty, because I think most people have quite, let's say, enjoyed the flexibility of working remotely part of the time. I think most people want to go back to the office, but many people want to do it. So I think we're going to have a lot of discontinuity in the world to manage our way through. So that is going to be the challenge. And then, I think the other trend, the growth in China is an acceleration of the trend. The fact that China went through this and came out, the first country really to successfully, more or less successfully fight the virus. I remember watching it in Wuhan, thinking, oh my God, this is just amazing. And then 3 months' time, we're locked down ourselves, and in China, they're sort of through the other side. So I think that is, and the tension between the US and China has been exacerbated. And then I think the events following, the killing of George Floyd and the understandable, frustration and anger that you see in Black communities, but not just in Black communities. Actually, if you look at the protesters, they come from the whole of society, or more or less the whole of society. And when I sent a note out to, the 100,000 people at WPP about it, I probably got more responses. Well, I certainly got more responses than I've ever had to any other communication. And more than half of them were from outside the US. This is not a US issue. It's a global issue. It's present in the UK, it's present in the Netherlands, it's in Singapore and Sweden, in its different ways. And so, and I think it's a reaction. It's a sort of reaction following, I think, the Me Too reaction on sort of sexism. Racism has now been put under the same spotlight, and I think that that's a good thing. And I think hopefully it will lead to lasting change in society, including companies.
So, to what extent is the response your personal response, but the response, let's say, as total WPP, driven by the values of WPP, or is that in your mind a totally different matter?
Well, we define our values as open, optimistic, and extraordinary. And I think open, talks to the idea of diversity and the need to be inclusive. So in that sense, it's driven by the values of WPP. But obviously, it's also a personal response. I mean, I wouldn't want to work in a company or lead a company that is in any way racist, and I expect people that come and work with WPP to be treated, in the same way that I'm treated. I have a sort of, I think I say, a healthy disrespect to some extent for authority and hierarchy, and I think and a sort of respect for people. So I think that some of that has been personal, and I talked to my colleagues, Jackie Canny, our Chief People Officer, Judy Jackson, who looks after culture for us. I worked with for a number of years. I have sort of trusted lieutenants who help to sort of shape our response, but ultimately, I guess it sort of sits on my shoulders, as it does on any chief executive, what to do. And I think, my view is we have to sort of, lean into this. We have to almost over respond, if that's the right way, to make clear what we want to do. And so we will publish our diversity data. It's not in any way where we would like it to be, but I think it's more important that we publish it than we try and hide it. And I hopefully by publishing it, it will force us to do better.
Yeah. Good, thanks. We talked about transformation. Then let's look more specifically at creative transformation. Now we're talking really about WPP. And there are beautiful words, creative transformation. But now I'm a client and they say, okay, show me the money. What is really different? Can you give a very crisp and clear answer to what really is now different?
Yeah, I think the answer is that what we do with clients is help them envision the future and then make that happen. And that process of envisioning, I think, is a creative process. Yes, it's informed by data and it's informed by insight, but ultimately to really create value, you have to come up with something that someone else hasn't thought of. Otherwise, it's the same as everybody else's. And if I were to be critical of management consultants, and I have been a management consultant myself in the past, so I know how they work, there's only two ways of making an argument in a management consultancy. You either say, I've studied the spreadsheet like really hard, and the answer is, 3.2, or I've looked around at the market, and of your 10 competitors, 9 are doing this, and therefore that must be the right thing to do. That's not, to my mind, lead to innovation, And the example I always use is the High Line in New York, right? So the High Line in New York. So if you went to a management consultant and said, well, we've got this area of Lower Manhattan, it's been run down for 50 years, it's the meatpacking district, they're all leaving, what are we going to do? You'd have got a response, well, you need to have an investment plan and an investment board, and you need to give tax subsidies, and you need to build, some schools and put the transport infrastructure in place. I can assure you they would not have said, well, you've got this disused railway that runs through the middle, why don't you plant a garden on it? I guarantee it. I've spoken to someone who was involved as a consultant looking at the project who was like, this is a really odd. But the High Line has created billions and billions of dollars of value. Yeah. And I would call that creative transformation. It brought regeneration to a district. And I think that's what I would like us to do, for our clients. And when we do well, we do it well. There's another story I like, which is when they launched the Boeing 707, I think it was the 707 or the 737. Yeah. They decided to promote it over Seattle. So they got the test pilot to fly over the Seattle Naval Fair, where there was 100,000 people watching, to promote it. And at the last moment, the pilot decided he would do a barrel roll in a 737 across the top of Seattle. Well, of course, it got global coverage. Yeah. It launched the plane. Everyone thought, wow, if this plane can do a barrel roll, it must be like really safe. That was someone that had an idea. You're not going to get that by studying a spreadsheet, no matter how many spreadsheets you look at.
No, so, I like that, and I like the examples really, really very much. I also see a pretty harsh reality, which is that those management consultants that you were one of tend to have the ear of the CEO, and they tend to look at where the big savings can be made. So until a few years ago, that would be primarily IT. And so they did all these IT transformation.
Yeah.
And pretty recently, they turned their eyes at where the big dollars are now, and they're shifting in the direction of marketing, media. Technology is playing a much bigger role in there. And so they are also shifting their eye. Yeah. They are growing at double digit per year, even though they only look at Excel sheets and say it's a 3.2 or 9 of the competitors. Whereas we have, these great creative minds and the technology. How come we aren't growing so much?
Well, that's what we need to. That's what we need to fix, isn't it? I mean, all I would say is, despite all the investment that companies made in IT, most consumers would say that companies' technology is pretty hopeless. Yeah. So I'm not sure how much those investments have been worth, right? And most technology innovation is driven by consumers adopting products, not by companies. Yeah. But I do think that as an industry, our industry, whether we call it the advertising industry or the communications business or the creative transformation industry, or whatever we call it, has to go further up the food chain inside companies. And, we do spend time in our best relationships and our most effective relationships. We do talk to the CEO. And one thing I've noticed during COVID is a much greater interest by CEOs in marketing, in communications, in purpose, in what their customers are doing, in how to communicate to them, in what the communications are. And actually that's sped up the process. It's made the work better. So, I think that is the direction that we need to head. And, the fragmentation of our business into all these different disciplines, I think, diminished us. And in a sense, what we're trying to do at WPP is have brands, really strong brands like Ogilvy or AKQA, but re-aggregate it under WPP so we can work together to give clients sort of simple solutions to their problems, rather than them having to scramble around trying to manage 5 different suppliers. It's not easy to do, but I think it's the right thing to do.
Yes, well, that's very interesting as you say, because I'm actually in the middle of 4-hour leadership program for the curriculum is codifying the case of new ways of working between agencies and clients.
Yeah.
And I'm Dutch, as you know, and in the Netherlands, there is this joint venture between Vodafone and Ziggo, which is a big telco player owned by Liberty Global. And WPP won the pitch, as you probably know, with a tight finish, but you won versus Accenture. And so I'm now talking to both parties to understand, what happened here, what are the learnings, and it's quite impressive. I mean, the efficiency in terms of eliminating literally hundreds of handovers in the creative process, both internally at client and at agency side, is really impressive. The fact that it's, one team, one leader, one point of contact, one strategic team for across all agencies, really compelling. There's also some challenges. We might go into that later, but that's a strong proposition. So what is this the blueprint? Is this how you see the future for WPP?
Yeah, I think it is the future, isn't it? I mean, it's really, the team, and I wasn't super involved, but I was aware of what was going on and what we did. I think the team had, a creative heart to it, and it had a strategy heart. It also had, a technology, a strong data and technology component to it. And it had also, I'd say, a lot of thinking around customer experience and building customer experiences. And one of, I think, the problems we've had in our industry is we focused too much on brands. And brands are important, but they're only one part of a company. And I think, consumers experience companies, and the brand is part of that. And I think what we let the management consultants do for a period of time and say, well, we're all about the experience, and the agencies do this little thing here called brand. But actually, we're the best people to define experiences, because we know how consumers think, we know how to delight them, we know how to talk to them, we know how to research them, we have, your word, empathy with them and what they want. And I think that actually the investment we've made in customer experience thinking has been so valuable. And we showed it to a big US retailer, and the client said to me, he said, what I've seen in the way you approach it is a humanity and an understanding of humanity. And I think that's what agencies and businesses like ours bring to situations. So, I think you saw that in the solution we put together in Ziggo. And I think, bringing together, creative and media and data and technology in a single partner is really important. The fewer handovers there are on our side, the better. The reality is, you're right, in big client marketing departments demand big agency teams by definition. And so, often cases, the fewer people on each side, the more efficient it is. And, that's something certainly I think we've got to get better at talking to our clients about how they change the way they work as well.
And so, yet at the same time, we've got all these vertical P&Ls.
Many fewer than we used to.
Yeah. So, what's the vision there? Is this it? Is this the end game?
No, I think it's not the end. It's not the end destination, but I think we've got pretty much to where we, most of where we need to get to. I mean, the reality is that for most clients, they could do most of their marketing with one of our creative agencies and one of our media partners. Yeah. There's one interface. They don't need to have a creative, they don't need to have a creative agency and a digital agency and a social agency and this agency, So I think that, a strong creative partner, an Ogilvy, plus a strong media partner is all you need. So there's only really one interface. And I think that makes things more efficient. Then there are specialists you can bring in if you need to redesign your identity. You can work with Landor or Super Union, Design Bridge. I think public relations tends to get underplayed in that model, and perhaps I should include that. But often in companies, the chief communications officer is separate from the chief marketing officer. But I do think that actually at the current time, public relations is part of our business that's been least impacted by what's happened. So it's increasingly important. But I think breaking down those silos within our own teams and integrating them is kind of what we're trying to do. Yeah.
So in the Netherlands, the WPP brand got a lot of exposure because of this reason. This was a quite very public and result. So the WPP brand has. So do you see then, if you say this is the blueprint, that actually the WPP brand will be more often the go-to brand if there's clients that want something similar to Vodafone Ziggo?
Look, I think to quote our Prime Minister here, I want to have our cake and eat it. What he said about Brexit. I'd like the WPP brand to be strong and our agency brands to be strong. I'd like, if we buy an agency, they go, wow, that must be a good agency because WPP have bought it, or that's going to get stronger. And the role model to me sort of is an LVMH or a Disney, which are well-managed creative businesses. They have multiple brands. When LVMH buy Tiffany, I think most people's reaction is, well, Tiffany's going to be a better company now it's part of LVMH than it was before, right? They don't think, oh my God, there's this holding company and the brand's going to go. That's not the way it works. So I think that WPP brand needs to reflect the talent and the agencies and the creativity within all of our companies and be strong. And then our companies individually should have really strong brands, but we just don't need 500 of them. The problem was before was we had 500 of them. Yeah. And that we don't need. So and we probably still have too many. And I don't mean we're going to merge, Ogilvy with something else. I mean, we've got lots of little small brands that for one reason or another.
No, I'm joking.
No. We're not going to do any more of that. But even within those businesses, there are lots of little brands that they only exist because the people in them don't want to be part of something else, right? That's not right. So we need to have sort of 10 to 12 big global brands, and then we'll have small specialist agencies like David, or Deep Local or whoever. But we need to have some logic to it, not just the CEO wants to be called something different.
No, clear. I think you mentioned these people, those small brands that have their own culture and they want to belong to that group with their own values. And we did a benchmark of WPP, and we saw indeed different culture profiles, as one would expect and probably hope even, for a diversity in agencies. But then we're getting in a world, and again about creative transformation, in which technology is playing an ever bigger role. And in our this week's leadership program, we talked a lot about AI and creativity.
Yeah,
we actually did a cynics and believers role play where the CMOs in our program had to take reverse roles in being a believer or a cynic on AI and the ethical questions that come with it. Perry Nightingale coined a beautiful phrase called synthetic diversity that I didn't know. The much rawer word is deep fake. And so this is about AI being able to, already you're not always sure whether you, in a call, whether you talk to a bot or to a real person. It's very easy, and let's say within the next 12 months, we probably now already, we can do the same with people. And it could immediately solve a lot of the diversity problems in our advertising and so on. So how do you look at that? Because what we learned in the study is that it ultimately comes very much down to your values as a company, and you have many companies. So how do you deal with a big ethical challenge like that being
I don't know. I mean, look, I'd rather fix the diversity problem by making sure we have the right people sort of behind the camera and in front of the camera, and not use a sort of computer to invent them. And I think there's something kind of strangely sort of creepy about having, sort of totally invented people. I guess it'll put a lot of models and actors out of business if it really took off. I don't know. I mean, I think the AI issues are a lot to do with the data sets people use to train the AI. There's that fantastic book on female diversity in AI, and we know the same is true in image recognition, depending on the data sets people use. So I think we're going to have to, have a sort of chief ethics officer, if you like, alongside our AI initiatives. And AI can do things, can pick out things in the wrong way, right? And create results that you didn't want to create. In the US, I believe there's restrictions on, targeting loans against certain groups, right? But it's possible that AI could do the same thing using data signals you weren't aware of to come up with the same insight without you knowing exactly on what basis it was making those decisions. So we are going to have to be really careful about how we use it.
Yeah, so, I mean, one of the examples is AI. It's exactly like you said. It's an algorithm fed by data that we feed the AI with. And if, I don't know, in click-throughs, people click more often on a smiling person, the AI will create smiling people. If the AI sees that people that are white are more often marked as beautiful, you'll get more white people. And this isn't, I'm a bit skeptical personally of ethics councils and so on, especially for a company the size of WPP, because then people could go, well, that's not my problem. The ethics council, we have an ethics council to deal with this. But this is so immersive and touching all of us, also a small agency in Peru or something, that this requires a lot of education and guidance on what values do we stand for as a WPP.
Yeah, that's true. But look, we can also use AI to, look at all of the ads we're making and make sure that they're representative, right? So there are positive ways of using it, like everything in life. There are positive ways of using it and negative ways of using it, and we have to decide, what we want to do with it, really.
And do you consider WPP, because you are an industry leader, do you aspire to play a leading role in the industry on this topic that is coming at us at a very high pace?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. I think we are part of. I'm not sure what particular initiative it is, but we are part of some initiative looking at those questions. And I think that absolutely, the way we market and how we market is 100% part of what we've always considered. Really, do we market to children and all of those types of questions? We have considered them for a long time, and I just think the list of topics and issues we're having to consider is getting longer, and it starts at a board level where we have a sustainability committee that does examine these types of issues and how we respond as an organization.
Great. I'm just going to look at some of the questions that people are posting, and I'll first share a compliment by Vaishali Sachdev, who's actually our second employee when in 2001 we started our own company, Mark and I. She says, love this. She's now the head of digital at Heineken Global, and she says, I love the analogy of the High Line. Recognize the typical consultant response versus dreaming of what's possible. So, but then somebody else says, unfortunately anonymous, interesting perspective on management consultants. However, not all some work that way, some actually build and creative disruptive platforms and ecosystems. I guess you always have that, right? A question of Noel Hamill. He says, great question, great session, quick up. Has Mark thought differently about how WP works as a result of COVID? And also what customers or companies are doing well through the crisis, and do you have a sense of why? Well, let's stick to the first question. Does this really, you said about people taking time to reflect on whilst we're in lockdown. How was that for you? And has that led to new insights? And are we going to see that at WPP? Or from WPP?
Well, I'm not going to retire, which I think is what quite a lot of people have been considering of a certain age, having not been in the office for quite a long period of time. But no, I think that, for me, there have been challenging parts of it, but I think for lots, you ask people in a room, have they learned a new skill at the time? And it's sort of bread making or sourdough or whatever. I managed to take up running, which I've never really done outside of a treadmill or a gym to go to. So, and actually, I've really enjoyed it. So I think people are sort of learning new skills. So, to my mind, the answer is clearly we're not going to go back to normal. And the reality is, for many of us, particularly living in London or New York, by the time we get back to normal, we'll have forgotten what normal was. It's going to be a big shock. I'm yet to go into the office in 16 weeks. And when I talk to, our clients, I think many of them feel the same way. Now, I think at the same time, we have to recognize that this has been, a terrible human tragedy. I think looking at the statistics, close to 450,000 people, are known to have died of COVID. So many, many people are impacted. Many more people are in, quite a serious, healthcare situation. And I think for lots of people, it's been difficult. If you're a young family, a single mother, living alone, it's not easy for anybody, this. And I think, the more privileged in society have probably had it, or not probably, have certainly had it easier than the less privileged in society. I live in a house with a garden and makes life a lot easier. So I'm certainly not going to bemoan it, and will say, try and celebrate it. But I think that it has been a time for reflection. And the number one question I'm asked in town halls is, will we go back to working in the office in the same way, or will we be able to work more flexibly in the future? And clearly the answer is yes, of course. I mean, we're going to have to do it because our talent will want it, and we're in the talent business after all. We're going to have to do it to make, competitively. I think it will offer opportunities for us to, reduce our office space. Though if everyone's trying to do it at the same time, I'm not entirely sure who everyone's going to be subletting this space to. Maybe we'll be turning offices back into housing, which might be not a bad thing given there's a housing crisis in the UK at the moment. And, working flexibly, we're going to have to figure out how to do it, because if everyone wants Friday off, or Friday working from home, we're not going to save much space either if everyone's in the office from Monday to Thursday. So we are going to have to work our way through it. But I'd say our goal definitely is to work more flexibly. I think the removal of distance has made global working much easier.
Yeah.
It's made creative processes. Ironically, people say the creative process is as strong, and clients are, happy, in some cases happier with the work. There's certainly a sense that it's happening faster in a more agile way we have to keep. I think part of that is because senior clients are getting more involved in the work earlier and seeing it more quickly. This notion of waiting 2 weeks to see your boss, to take them through an idea, just the cycle time is just much faster.
Yeah.
And, the CEO, one of our agents said to me the other day, he said, I don't think there's a single thing I used to do in my office that I can't do just as well being at home. So it's quite an admission,
there you
right?
go.
Given we spend £600 million a year on real estate.
Yeah, no, totally. I think this triggers quite a lot of questions from our viewers. They're at a slightly different level than let's say our housing. One asked, well, agencies build brands. Carlos Fonseca asked, agency build brands, but can also build new messaging for a new society. What's WP views on this? And Raphael Schwartz says, what transformation projects have been accelerated at WPP by the C19?
So look, I think on transformation projects, it's sort of easier to manage a crisis than it's truly to transform a company. But I'd say we're certainly looking at, the ways in which we work, how we connect. We're certainly looking at, I think it's sort of the restructuring we've done, sort of simplifying the brands, putting in place country managers, has shown that it's much better to have like one approach to something than everyone having their own approach. I don't think we could have done this without a lot of the changes that we made. So I think that it will certainly accelerate our shift to the cloud, from a technology perspective, absolutely, right? It was already underway, but really the notion of having one common technology platform, one common set of HR policies, one common approach, to finance systems, all of those things, it will definitely accelerate. In terms of new messaging, I talked to the work we did for Procter & Gamble, taking on racism, a film called The Choice, made by Keith Cartwright, who's a Black creative director, and Gray invested in his business in partnered with him in setting up his shop in LA. We announced it 2-3 weeks ago. He's done a fantastic film for P&G, called The Choice, that takes on sort of racial issues. And I think that, we have throughout this done a tremendous amount of work with the World Health Organization. It's not a perfect organization, but it's kind of all we have. And we run a campaign for them in sub-Saharan Africa. We run campaigns for them around the world. A number of our media partners have donated close to $20 million or more media time. So I think we've really tried to sort of, use the power of our creative influence to help wherever we can.
Yeah. There's the last big topic. We talked about growth, transformation, creative transformation, what's happening in the world around us. I now want to look at, let's say, the leadership, CMO leadership, but let's start with your own leadership. I was pretty impressed when Paul Pullman, in one of the earlier webinars, I think 2 weeks ago or so, he said that the best investment in 10 years at the helm of Unilever was an investment in a, let's say, self-development, personal development journey for all his leadership team, hundreds of people, and they cascaded it to thousands of people. A lot of introspection, coaching, therapy, whatever, like really digging into your own passion and purpose. Because if they aren't aligned with what the company stands for, then you'll probably not have the same energy and push to help and contribute. Mm. So if you think about that, how do you look at that for yourself? You're the leader of a very large company. How much introspection or coaching, etc., have you? I mean, are you using those tools? Can you see where he was going, and would that apply to you?
I'm probably more on the practical side of those discussions. I guess I have people I listen to and talk to and try and solicit as many views as I can. But ultimately, the decision sort of rests with one person, and in a way that makes it easier. I don't believe in co-CEOs. Like, how do you? No, then the decision becomes a negotiation, not a decision. So, I think, it's interesting. I do think there's ways in which we could professionalize leadership development at WPP a little bit more than we have it today. Whether coach is exactly the right way to do it, I don't know. I mean, I sort of tend to approach things really quite instinctively, quite a lot about how I would like to be treated, and probably maybe try and see the best in people, not the worst in people, which might be a weakness. I don't know, but
most people's development, and definitely personal development, don't go in a straight line. They rather go,
Yeah.
So, is there any moment or anything that happened in recent or longer period ago in your life where that was like a profound insight and that changed the way you thought about leadership and the responsibilities that come with that?
Yeah, probably, when I went from I spent quite a lot of time at the center of WPP, and I went to run Wonderman, and that was probably actually sort of the most impactful thing, certainly in my career. I wouldn't be doing this job if I hadn't done that. And in a way, I wish I'd done it. I wish I'd done it earlier. I think that big companies, there's an attraction to sort of being in the center of power, but I also think there is a satisfaction in running your own thing in some way. In 1999, 2001, in the sort of height of the first dot-com bubble, I went off and actually with a friend or a colleague, we set up a company, Web Rewards, which was sort of a subsidiary that we owned part of a German company called Web Miles. And so I sort of rode that whole internet bubble from sort of 99 to 2001. And I think there's a certain satisfaction, really in running things and seeing the impact of your decisions. And also, I think that the responsibility to make decisions is an important one. I've sort of been, I think, lucky in terms of doing a number of different things. I've worked in a company, I've worked in a consulting firm, I've started a small business. But I'd say, really running a large company and, the situation at Wonderman was not dissimilar from the situation I found myself in running WPP. Sort of coming in at the deep end is, has its own challenges, if you like. But, you sort of just write a list of them and sort of tick them off as best you can. You know what I mean?
So, and I remember also, Pullman, we referenced that something that was mentioned many times, that in his first day, he said, we won't do quarterly profit reporting anymore. He said, because probably they won't fire me on the first day. Are there like big decisions that you made that's maybe not scared you, but that you were very nervous about? Or is it because you seem, so everything seems to go really smooth and you're always cool, calm?
But it hasn't gone, I wouldn't say it's gone that smoothly. Look, I think the sort of the bigger decisions you can make, the better, because they have more impact on the organization, right? So I think bringing VML and Y&R together then bringing Wunderman and J. Walter Thompson together, and then, selling Kantar, have been, three relatively, significant decisions. VML1R was $1 billion of revenue. Wunderman Thompson was about 2.5. Kantar was a bit bigger than that. So we sort of addressed more or less half of WPP's revenue through those three decisions. And, we wouldn't be, we have our challenges during COVID, but it's not an existential threat to WPP. We're not going to be broken up or whatever. The company's in the strongest financial position it's been in 12 years, coming the lowest level of debt in 12 years. Kantar, which is a fantastic business, but really a different business from WPP with its own set of challenges, is 60% owned by Bain Capital, who I think successfully turned that round over a number of years, and we retain a 40% shareholding. And we have a much simpler business to manage and an integrated business, so fewer silos, a more modern offer, stronger leadership running the individual companies. So I think being able to make sort of significant decisions quickly is really important in these jobs. If you don't, they only get harder to make. And you're right. If the first thing you do is the wrong one, in a way, you should always take your riskiest decision first, because if it goes wrong, it's like we'll have a binary result. But I think that bringing VML1R together, I could see, within a couple of months that it was working, and that gave me the confidence to work with the Wunderman and J. Walter Thompson management to do the same thing. And they Mel and Tam came together and brought that business together. So, I think big, significant decisions early on, you have to sort of reset the direction, as you say, as quickly as you can.
We're getting to the end. I want to ask, because I see that almost all the questions of the viewers are really about what's the current developments with both C19 and the Black Lives Matter movement, and broader than that, actually, as you rightly pointed out. It's mostly CMOs who are listening here. What is your advice, client-side CMOs? What is your advice to them? If there's one lesson that they should take away from this, that they spent, what would that be?
I don't know. Look, I mean, I don't want to sound patronising. There's a danger, but I think CMOs have to sort of step up and lead, don't they? I mean, the CMO is, in my mind, the voice of the customer within the organisation, and they have to step up and lead that and define their job, I'd say, in as broad a way as they can. I mean, I think the challenge for CMOs is, I think I got this insight from your seminars, every CMO's job description is different and the metrics are different. Why do chief financial officers go so far? Because they have to sort of deliver two things. They have to deliver profit improvement and an accurate budget, right? And everyone knows how well they did those two things. It's measurable, and the job description is sort of the same all over the world. Can you make the numbers, and do they go up? Yeah. CMOs have like a much harder job. Their external factors are more important. Every job description is different. They may or may not be responsible for innovation. They may or may not be responsible for sales. They may or may not be responsible for pricing. And so it's a tough job. And but I think it's still a really important job. But
so your one message is,
step up, define the broadest role you can for the impact you can have across the organisation, because you'll need that. You'll need that to succeed.
As a voice of the customer and all the.
It is a voice of the customer in the organisation.
Yeah, great. Hey, Mark, already the hour is past. I really want to thank you for an open conversation. Also on behalf of all the customer viewers to be here and listen for all your questions. Next week, we'll have my very dear friend and partner in crime. We'll talk with Antonio Lucio, the Chief Marketing Officer of Facebook. He also has a set of challenges of his own, so that should be an exciting one as well. I want to thank everybody, and especially you, Mark, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Brilliant. Right. Thanks, Frank. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for listening. Take care.